Hello everybody, I'm Nick, and in this video I'm going to show you how you can get started with MassTransit in .NET. This has been one of my most requested videos, and that's for very good reason. MassTransit is an excellent library and pretty much a household name nowadays for building applications that do any sort of distributed messaging. It is very feature-rich, very flexible, well-documented, and portable. And in this video I'm going to show you how you can get started with it and use it with a couple of providers. Now, because this is about messaging, I'm going to be using RabbitMQ and Amazon SQS in this video to show you some of the features. And because I'm going to be using Amazon SQS, this video is sponsored by AWS. So if you want to claim some free credit, check the link in the description to see how you can do that. And if you want to learn more about AWS for C# developers, I have a free course on dometrain.com. So check that out. It's free. Just sign up. Yours to keep forever. That's it. If you like that of content and you want to see more, make sure you subscribe. And for more training, check out my courses on dometrain.com. All right, let me show you what I have here. Now, one of the coolest things about MassTransit is that you can actually install templates created by MassTransit themselves. You can do that by using the .NET new command and then simply saying masstransit.templates. And if you were to do that, this will install those templates. However, I want to take it easy and explain to you everything about MassTransit and how it works. So I'm not going to use any of the templates, and I think you're going to get a better understanding by this approach. So I'm going to start by just creating a new project, and it's going to be a simple console application, and I'm going to call that MassTransit demo. So very simple, very bare bones. The reason why I do that is because I want to introduce you to the concept of messaging. And the idea is very simple. You generally have two basic concepts when it comes to messaging. There can be more, but these are the basic ones. And the first one is that someone, a sender, wants to asynchronously tell something to someone who's listening for something. So if service A or maybe class A wants to tell something to service B or even class B, this can be either in-app or outside the application, then that A part will send something to that receiver, and that receiver will receive it and do something about it. But you generally have a one-to-one relationship there. You also have the pub/sub scenario, where one publisher is letting everyone interested know that something happened. So for example, if a user was created in your system, you might say, hey, user created, and just broadcast this, publish this message, and not necessarily know what happens down the pipeline, who's going to listen to it, and what they're going to do with this. That's not the important thing. The important thing is that you let the message out. So these are the two general approaches you have. With what I'm going to show you today, you can do both, but it's up to you to choose what works better for your application. And if you want to know when to choose one or the other, that AWS course I have on Dometrain does explain quite a bit there. So what I'm going to do is turn this console application to a web app, and I'm going to do that by saying sdk.web. That behind the scenes will go and add some NuGet packages, but the experience I have in the front end is the same. And all I'm going to say is that I'm going to turn this into a web application builder, which I have to spell properly here. And then I'm going to create the app by saying builder.build and then app.run. And that's it. That will build a basic app. And what I want to have in this application is a publisher class and a consumer class. Something will happen and I'm going to broadcast that message, and something in this app will listen for that message. Now that message will be represented as a record. So I'm going to say public record ping here, and I'm going to say something like button here, because I'm going to broadcast this message based on the button press. Now to wire that up, I'm going to do the following. I'm going to say ping publisher over here, and this publisher will be a background service over here. That's a .NET thing. I haven't added any NuGet package at this point, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to inject here an iLogger, which I have because I'm using a web application. So I'm going to inject that, and I'm going to log a message every time I press a button. Now I'm not going to bore you with the implementation of this because it doesn't really matter for what I'm showing. So I'm just going to turn this into an async method, and I'm going to put the implementation here. All this really says is that while this application has been canceled, keep looping around and checking if any button other than escape has been pressed. And if it has, just log it in the console. So to register that over here, I'm going to say to builder.services.add hosted service, and then use the ping publisher as a hosted service. I'm going to just run this application just like that to show you what's happening. And then what's going to happen is every time I press a button, you're going to see that there is something triggered, and you see it in the console. So we have a way to publish something on a button press, which is what we're going to use to publish that message. Now, to implement that, I need to add MassTransit into the project. So I'm going to search for MassTransit, and that is it. That's the main package. It has something like 50 million downloads. It's a very popular package. It's very widely used. It's a lovely library. Now, configuring it is actually surprisingly easy to get started with. I think it could be easier. That's a bit of an issue I have with the way it's being registered, but I think it's good enough. So all I'm going to say is builder.services.add MassTransit, and then I'm going to use the configurator. And then to start with, all I need to do here is say x.using in memory, and I'm going to use the overload here, and I'm going to say configuration, configure endpoints, and then pass down the context. And that's the most basic configuration needed without a consumer, but we want to be able to consume those pings. And to do that, I'm going to make a ping consumer class, and that class will be of type iConsumer. And then I'm going to pass down the object I want to listen for, which is that ping object. I'm going to implement missing members, and that basically looks like a mediator handler because fundamentally it will work that same way with the in-memory version. And these MassTransit consumers are configured by default to support DI. So I can simply say private read-only iLogger ping consumer over here, and then just grab a logger and do whatever I want. What I want to do here is just print what button was pressed. So doing something like this is enough. Now remember, this is on the consumer side, but because I want to have that messaging functionality, I need to go to the publisher and actually wire it up to publish that message. So what I'm going to do here is say private read-only ibus, and that ibus is coming from MassTransit, and we can use the publish method to publish that information. So I'm going to say await bus.publish, and I'm going to publish a new ping object, which is my contract over here, and I'm just going to say take this button to string and just comment this one out. We don't want to log it here. And that is it. Now this will work in the same fashion as Mediator would with in-process messaging. Now there's two things I need to do before I can actually run this application. The first one is to say add consumers over here in the add MassTransit configuration, and that's because I need to let MassTransit know that there are consumers somewhere ready to consume messages. So by saying .add consumers, I can provide the type of an assembly marker, in this case the program.cs, and then say assembly. All this really says is that, hey, find anything that implements the iConsumer interface in the assembly that contains the type program.cs, and that is it. The other thing I need to do is actually move that contract into its dedicated file. And then once that's moved, it needs to have a namespace. That is a requirement, so I have to add it here. But once I do everything, I can actually just run this. And now if I go to the console, I start pressing buttons, as you can see, these now are coming from the consumer, not from the publisher. So messages are being published and then consumed in here. And that is the basic logic of MassTransit publishing. You publish at some point, you consume at some other point, and that is it. And then you have this middleman, which is your contract, which contains all the information you want to carry from one point to the other. Now we're going to take all that logic and move it to a real API doing real work and start publishing messages and consuming them using a real queue. So what I have here is I just added this movies API, which I'm going to show you very quickly what it contains. It uses an in-memory database just to simplify things in case you want to grab the code from the description and do something with it. But we run this API now, and what I can do now is go to Postman and say, hey, create this new movie called Nick the Greek. It came out in 2023, and it's a comedy and an action movie. So it's going to go ahead and just create that. And I can use things like get endpoints here to list all movies, get a specific movie, and so on. I can update a movie. I can say that, you know what, this is not actually an action movie and a comedy, it is just a comedy. So I can update the service, and as you can see, it has been updated, and then I can go ahead and delete it. Now, it can be very useful to actually also publish messages into your system that every time a movie is created, deleted, or updated, someone can listen to that and act on it. For example, if a movie was deleted, maybe you want to delete all the ratings for that movie. There's many reasons why you might want to do that. So in our case, what I'm going to do is wire up MassTransit in this application and publish a message every time an action is taken. So let's go ahead and add MassTransit here. Now, to wire up MassTransit here, I could just install the MassTransit package, but because I want to use a real queue system, in this case Amazon SQS, what I'm going to do instead is use the Amazon SQS transport. So MassTransit has a common interface, the same iConsumer, the same iBus, or the same iPublisher, and based on those abstractions, you can actually have different transport. So you can have Amazon SQS, you can have Azure Service Bus, you can even have S3, Kafka, gRPC. There's so many things you can have. We're going to start here with Amazon SQS. So I'm going to just install this MassTransit package with that transport, and I'm going to configure it in the program.cs. Now, as a publisher, all I need to say is builder.services.add MassTransit over here, same idea as before. And now I could say using in memory, but I also have this extra transport of the Amazon SQS here. So now I can use this same overload as I had before in the in memory, but now as you can see, it has Amazon SQS specific types, which will allow me to configure SQS specific things. In my case, I just need two things. The first thing I want to say is host over here, and say that this is in the London location in AWS, and then I can simply ignore all the other settings, and that's because my machine is already authorized against AWS, so I don't need any connection strings, any access keys, any nothing. You can, however, if you want to, use the overload over here to have things like credentials, secret keys if you need them, and so on, but I don't need them, so I'm gonna roll them back. And then the other thing we have is the same configure endpoints method that we had before, and that is it. Now, it's also very common to use kebab case for endpoint name formatters. So this also sort of comes in many applications, and we're going to use it here as well. Ultimately, you use the naming conventions you want, but in here, I'm just going to use kebab case. All right, so with all that very simple configuration, all I'm going to do now is go to the movie service and configure my publisher. Now, previously, I used the iBus interface, and I'm going to do the same here, but there's a bit of a caveat. If this service was scoped and it's coming all the way down from the controller, which is also a scoped construct, scoped service, then you would actually use the publish or the iPublish endpoint interface. That's because the iPublish interface is also scoped, and you can maintain that scope in your publishing. In this case, this movie service is a singleton, so it doesn't really matter. So with that now injected over here, all I need to do is go to the body of my method after the actual work is done, after the movie was created in this in-memory database, and say await bus.publish. Now I need to publish something, and I don't want to publish my internal domain model here. What I want to publish is actually a contract that my consumer can use on their end as well and stay up to date with me and do all the processing. So for example, my movie object here has some logic in it on how to generate that slug, which I have here in the movie. If you remember, we generate a URL-friendly slug if you want to just use it in your URL to retrieve the movie. Now, that's not something I want to leak to my consumer. So what I want to do instead is actually create a class library package that will contain my contracts, which is going to be just DTOs themselves, and the consumer can use those to build its consumers with. So all I'm going to do is click class library and say messaging contracts over here. And that's it. And I'm going to add a reference to that package. So over here, messaging contracts, and that's it. Now, what will I have in here? Delete this class 1 useless thing, and then simply create one record per action that I want to publish a message for. So in this case, movie created, movie deleted, movie updated, all of them contain all the movie details. And as those objects change, these parameters can change as well. Remember, however, that these contracts are contracts that are versioned, so you can't just break the contract because you're going to break the consumer. So you have to communicate with the consumer that you're going to start making those changes and then coordinate them. So with that in place, I'm going to go back here and say publish. And what I want to publish is a message which is generated by that movie object, and then map it to a created object here. So map it to that DTO with a mapper that I have over here, just a manual mapper. That's all you need. And then just publish it here. Now, a bit of another caveat here. In a real application, it is very likely you will not do first the insert to the database and then publish the message, because that is not an atomic operation and it's very hard to roll back. What happens if, for example, the add in the database succeeds, but publishing to the message queue fails? There are ways to solve this, and they can be a bit complicated, and I do cover them in that course. Link is in the description. For what we're showing now, this is more than enough. Then I just have to do the same for update over here, and in the end for delete. And that is it. So now we have the publisher side of things, but we also need the consumer to actually consume those messages. And for that, I'm going to create a similar application as to that first one. So just a simple console application and call it movies consumer. and it's going to have the same logic. So I'm going to turn this into a web application. So I'm going to go here and say .web, and I'm going to add MassTransit Amazon SQS over here. Just simple as that. Now I will need a reference to that contracts package because I need to grab access to them to build my consumers. But other than that, the logic will be very similar to what you saw before. So I'm just going to create a new directory called consumers over here, and I'm going to create one consumer per message type. So the first one is that movie created consumer, which only listens to that movie created message, and you can do whatever you want in this consume method. Now I'm going to add the two missing ones, and they're going to have the exact same consumption logic, which is just, hey, log that you consumed something. Here you go. Everything is in place now. And now I'm going to start to write that program.cs. Now, a lot of what we saw before is actually the same. We still have this add MassTransit logic, and we're still going to have this using Amazon SQS logic, but I'm going to have a more full implementation here. So we still have this kebab case endpoint formatter, but we also have an in-memory Saga repository provider, which if you want to know more about Sagas, leave a comment down below. I'm very happy to talk about them. They're a bit more of an advanced concept. And then we add those consumers in the same way. We add Saga state machines, we add Sagas, we add activities, and then we add that Amazon SQS transport over here. And that is it. But before I do that, I want to show you something very cool in the AWS UI. If I go on the homepage and I search for SQS and I try to see all of my queues in SQS, as you're going to see, I have nothing. There are no queues in my system, no topics, no nothing. But now if I go here and I say, hey, go ahead and just run this movies consumer, watch what happens. The first thing that happens when the application starts is that MassTransit acknowledges that what it's looking for, what it needs, the queues it needs don't exist, and it goes ahead and creates them. This, of course, is configurable, but it's very cool that it can actually detect what it needs and build the resources it needs to function. Now, in some cases, you'd actually want to have all that scripted out with infrastructure as code or IAC, and you actually can configure it to disable this functionality and point to the resources you want. But it's very cool that if you just want to get started, it's really cool that MassTransit can just hit the ground running, build everything it needs, and you can start processing messages. So my consumer is running. I'm going to go back to the Amazon portal. I'm going to just refresh here. And as you can see, my queues per message have been created. And now what I'm going to do is actually stop the consumer first. And I'm going to run the API. So just run the same exact API and go ahead and create a movie. So I'm going to create the same classic Nick the Greek. Let's go, created. So the message has been published, but the consumer is not running. So nothing can actually listen for that message to do something with it. This means that if we go back here and refresh, we're going to see eventually one message to be available. Here you go in the movie created. And if I go ahead and I poll for that message, I'm going to say send and receive, and then simply say, sorry, not send, poll for messages, you're going to see that message published here with a bunch of options. Here you go. And as you can see, tons of details about the message. We can actually see it comes from SNS, not directly SQS. I'm going to show that in a second. Then you can see the body of the message with all the details we have. And then you can see some details that are attached to that message, like the machine name, the process name, you have the process ID, and so on. All things you can actually access if you want during consumption. So now with that in place, I'm going to go ahead and just run the consumer. That message is held on the cloud. And now that I run it, as you can see, movie created message has been processed, and I can just take it and you can see all the values that are properly serialized in that record. So I'm going to go back and just create another movie and another movie, and then maybe just update a movie as well. Here you go. And as you can see now, all of these messages are coming in real time, going to the topic, from the topic to the queue, and then from the queue to this consumer service very, very easily. But here's where this gets very interesting and very exciting. And it makes MassTransit a very interesting value proposition for those who are not working with a simple messaging technology or a single cloud provider. Let's say that suddenly you have to stop using Amazon SQS and you want to move into RabbitMQ. Maybe you run it in prem. Maybe for some reason you want to move away from one transport to another one. What can you do and how hard is this with MassTransit? Well, it's actually very, very simple. All you need to change is this piece of code. That's it, nothing else. So what I'm going to do is just remove that Amazon SQS package, and I'm going to add the RabbitMQ over here. And that's it. Now I'm going to comment out this using Amazon SQS. And what I'll do is, you guessed it, using RabbitMQ. And that is it. All of my other code in the project and the consumer can stay exactly the same because the abstraction stays the same. What changes is how all the wiring will happen behind the scenes, but you don't have to know about this. This is a responsibility of MassTransit. So you're going to have the same sort of context and configuration functionality here, and you're still going to have the same configure endpoints call, but we also have to configure the host here. So to do that, all I have to say is configure it to localhost because I will run it locally, and then the username is guessed and the password is guessed. Those are the defaults for RabbitMQ, at least on Docker. And I'm going to take the exact same code and then update the consumer to also do the same thing. So remove AWS SQS, go here, comment this out, and paste this code, and that is it. So what I'm going to do now is actually use Docker to run RabbitMQ locally, and I'm going to go ahead and just run it over here. Can take a second for it to spin up, but it should be up any second now. And sorry for how bright this is, but RabbitMQ also has sort of an interface. You can see all your queues and your messages and exchanges. And what I'm going to do is go to the queues and show you I have no queues in this system. But what I'm going to do is go back and just run the consumer again. The consumer code is exactly the same. Nothing changed but this using RabbitMQ. So I'm just going to say run this, and that is it. Same logic will kick in, bus started, and created those necessary queues. So if I go back to the UI now, you can see all the queues. They're empty. They don't have any messages in them. But if I go back and I stop the consumer and I run the API with the exact same code, but this piece of code changed here, then I can go ahead and just say, create a new movie, and it will do it. And if I go back to the UI, you're gonna see that we had some activity here in this movie create. We had one published message, which is ready to be consumed. And if anything, I can actually get the message here and show you what it has. That's the message I just published using MassTransit. And now, of course, consumption is exactly the same as before. I'm just gonna run my consumer, the message is there, and is now consumed. How cool is that? The exact same code, able to process multiple types of technologies in your application, just like that. If you want to move away, you're not necessarily locked in to that specific provider. I think MassTransit is an excellent library. There's tons of places I can actually take this, and I can even make a series if you're interested, if you want to know more about sagas, resilience, and so many other things. So if you want to know more about them, leave a comment down below. I would love to make these videos. Well, that's all I had for you for this video. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, keep coding.